Good afternoon to all from joining from Europe, and good morning to all joining from Latin America and from other countries in the US. I welcome you all for the EMEA webinar co-organized by the Euro-Mediterranean Economics Association, the Brain Capital Alliance, in collaboration with the OECD Neuroscience-inspired policy initiative and the Global Brain Health Institute, plus the Latin American Brain Health Institute and INECO. I think this is a very great opportunity to really learn from other experiences of brain capital innovation in Latin America and try really to understand a bit more on what has been achieved over the years to explore collaborations with Europe, Mediterranean, and Africa. So thank you all for joining for this very important event on brain capital. So let me start a bit with some introduction on the concept, which we have been developing with our colleagues for a couple of years now. Brain capital, we intend by it by a productive and quite complex capital stock that accumulates over the life cycle. And it's really multidimensional. We tried at EMEA with the collaboration with a working group on measuring brain capital to disentangle the different pillars of it from brain health, brain skills, and all the drivers, in fact, that allows us to really enhance this brain capital. So these factors, what I call them D pillars, socioeconomic factors, they are varying from physical to socio-cultural one, and in fact, trying to enable our brain to remain active, healthy, develop, and also try to limit as much as possible the deterioration based on the life cycle and also of the processes of aging and illnesses and so on and so forth. Now, the policies guiding the development of both the natural and socioeconomic environments are important drivers to brain capital, since they could also either impede or favor its development. So we could really act act proactively to ensure that this brain capital, not only it is maintained, but also it is accumulated and enhanced over the years. Now, also this concept is aiming at providing a better understanding of our economic values that can be derived from identifying and unlocking the latent human potential. Now, of course, we have the concept of human capital development, but it does not really include what I call the research of neuroscience, psychiatry, psychology, which have been really advancing over the years. And we as economists try really to create this multidisciplinarity between the disciplines to ensure that we are understanding from each other and also trying to learn from each other on the research that has been developed over the years. The brain capital framework has in fact been recently cited in many public and private reports, including the United Nations Development Programme, Human Capital Development Report. My colleague, Harris Iyer, who is a promoter of the concept, neuroscientist, and he is with us in the audience today, was presenting the work on on brain capital in the UN General Assembly these days in New York. But also the World Health Organization on brain health capital, the World Health Organization in the position statements were also mentioning the concept, and also other instances like, for example, PricewaterhouseCoopers and other foundations like the Lundbeck really acknowledge this concept, and we are trying all to work together to ensure that this is really moved forward beyond the frontiers in the different countries, for example, Latin America and also Mediterranean, Africa and Europe and other regions of the world. So this is where we are, and today we have the pleasure to host colleagues from Argentina. Argentina is a world leader, in fact, in the advancement of brain capital into policy and workforce development. And there are many developments also in Latin America, which we are trying to map together with our colleagues. So also I wanted to make a notice that the Facundo Manes MD campaign in Argentina is very much aligned with the brain capital principles, For example, the concept of empathy, which also is a major platform in Argentina. So there are other initiatives, for example, the Latin American Brain Health Institute and the Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez at the Universidad of San Andres also hosted a short course on brain capital in public policy in Buenos Aires, sponsored by the Inter-American Development Bank and certified also by the Ministry of Health of the country. So we are seeing much more innovations integrating, in fact, neuroscience, psychiatry, psychology into public policy matters to respond in reality to the current and upcoming societal challenges that could in fact inspire other regions of the world, including the regions that we are in today, Mediterranean and Africa. So it's really my pleasure to host and to welcome very nice, very distinguished panelists today at our webinar. And I would like to start welcoming Fernando Torrente. Now, Fernando, he's a director of the Institute of Neuroscience and Public Policies at the INECO Foundation. And also he's a director of the Department of Psychotherapy at INECO. And also he is the Dean of the School of Human and Behavioral Science at Favaloro University in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm very, very happy to welcome Fernando. So Fernando, you have a great experience on neuroscience research, brain health aspects in Argentina, and also probably you have also experiences in Latin America because you are really the leader in the region. So we want to learn from you, and please, you have 8 minutes to introduce from your perspective. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rim. It is a pleasure for me to be here in representation of the INECO Foundation. I want to also share a big hug from Facundo Manes, who was not able to be here because of his political agenda, but he's, as our honorary president, is involved in all the work that I will be talking about. My presentation will be a journey through the work of INECO Foundation from the laboratory to the arena of public policy. Some years ago, we understood that some of the ideas we studied in the laboratory were of interest beyond the walls of the laboratory and the clinics where we mainly work at. Ideas such as empathy, social cooperation, mental health, emotion and cognitive development were of interest for the whole society. But we also understood very soon that these ideas do not spill naturally into politics, that an interesting idea in the academy or the clinics is not necessarily understood or applied in public policy if there is no specific articulation. If you don't have the organization and the political activity, these kind of ideas will not disseminate easily in the public agenda. So INECO Foundation 5-6 years ago began work in order to articulate in a more organical way with the public policy agenda. My presentation will be a very short journey through the main facts, the main work that we did in this intention of articulate with politics. In the first step was in 2016, and our aim was to bring neuroscience and the idea of mental and brain capital to a government in the Buenos Aires province. The Buenos Aires province is the largest province of Argentina, is the more important in economical terms, but also is the one with the bigger poverty reservoirs in Argentina. So we tried to install and disseminate the concept of mental capital or brain capital with the government of the province in that moment. So we developed a dissemination program. We wrote a document about mental capital in order to distribute it with the public agents and to initiate a resource mapping of the province in order to develop brain capital along the time. This was the first step where INECO Foundation worked with the government in Argentina in order to translate neuroscience ideas in the public policy agenda. In the following year, 2017, we began a technical cooperation with the Inter-American Development Bank for the application of behavioral science and neuroscience in the public policies of the Latin America region. Agustin, who accompanies us here, was initially part of this cooperation. The objective was to implement initiatives and research projects based on neuroscience and behavioral science to improve different aspects of public policies in childhood and elderly, because they were the more vulnerable population that we were trying to translate neuroscience ideas. The cooperation extended between 2018 and 2022. And in the meanwhile, we created the Institute of Neuroscience and Public Policy inside the INECO Foundation. During the period of this technical cooperation, we carried a randomized control trial in the biggest healthcare organization of elder people in Latin America, the PAMI of Argentina, of which Carlos Reazzoni was former director, so he knows it very well, a really big institution of health. The aim of the study was to reduce unnecessary prescriptions for cognitive impairment using behavioral science, and we obtained very good result. It was the biggest randomized control trial of behavioral science in Latin America. And the focus was elderly and cognitive deterioration. We also, during the cooperation, launched a series of studies for tracking mental health and behavior during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we also collaborated with different governments as advisors in the response to COVID-19, the behavioral response to the pandemic. Also, we developed a cognitive and socio-affective stimulation program in early childhood through parental training, enhanced it with behavioral science strategies, and piloted it in 2 provinces of Argentina. The childhood interventions are one of the most important things that we have to expand in the region. There are some differences in all Latin America about the expansion of these kinds of programs. Argentina is lagging behind some other countries, so it's a very important issue to expand cognitive stimulation and social emotional stimulation in childhood, in first childhood. We also developed a platform for integrated diagnosis of dementias for free use in all Latam, who was designed and carried by the Gero Chile group and the Agustin Ibanez team. They developed a platform for the early detection and the registry of all various clinical information around the region in order to improve detection and treatment of dementias in all the Latin America region and of free use. So it's a very important accomplishment. We also participated of the launching of the first national NACH unit of Argentina as advisor and supporter of the initiatives. We also we finished the cooperation this year, but last year we initiated a brain capital program in the municipality of 3 de Febrero, a large department of the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires, training with the aim of training agents on brain capital concepts and intervention, and mapping the department resources for brain capital development along the life cycle. This was a pilot program to be replicated in other local government and in other departments or local governments of departments of the province of Buenos Aires and all the country, because local governments are the ones who have the most resources in the territory. And finally, I want to share with you that we were working with Facundo Manes and Fundación INECO and other organizations of brain capital in Argentina for the development of a brain capital law project in order to be presented at the Congress of Argentina, a brain capital law with the aim of developing an institute and getting resources in order to install brain capital as a public policy all around the country. So this journey, for us, it was a very important learning of how to articulate with the real politics and how to translate research projects into real interventions in the territory. We think that this is the most important challenge for neurosciences and behavioral science, how to translate in a real world intervention program, because if not, our more brightest ideas will not have the impact with that we desire. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fernando, for this very good introduction on what is going on in terms of brain capital initiatives in Argentina. This is really a great innovation, because in reality, having a law on brain capital will really push forward the whole concept framework into mainstreaming it in public policy at all levels. Just one question before I give the floor to the next panelist. Is Argentina funding from its own budget this institute that you mentioned? And is there a plan, for example, to establish some kind of private-public partnership to really move forward these policy and the instruments and really make it mainstreamed at Argentina level? Also, I want to notice that Argentina is now a member of the OECD. So it's really very important for Argentina to be leading this debate and really having this, what I call very innovative framework on brain capital, which is a great opportunity also for other countries to follow what you have done. So what do you say about this?
Yes, thank you, Rip, for the question. It's a very important and interesting question, how to fund these kind of initiatives. You know, Argentina is not in the best moment in economy now. So we have a very, very short-term big problems. So this agenda of short economy problems competes always with the long-term necessities of the country. We are always trying to solve short-term problems, and we have no resources to think and invest in the long-term and important issues like brain capital development. So the project has some considerations about how to obtain this kind of resources. Mainly in Argentina, this kind of initiative, like the technical cooperation that we developed these last years, are funded by organizations like the IDB or the World Bank. So usually the multilateral organizations are the ones who provide the funding for this kind of initiatives. So probably the articulation with this kind of organization, and as you mentioned, the OECD is a very big and important, but we have some troubles with that. Maybe you know that Argentina have been some debates and conflicts about integrating there, because there are some measuring and things that we are not accomplishing in order to integrate the OECD. So probably this is one of the best, the most important problems, how to fund these very long-term, important long-term initiatives, and multilateral funding groups are the resources that usually we profit.
Thank you, Fernando. This is very clear message to the multilateral organizations, and you know that currently those organizations are being a kind of under, say, discussion to enhance their capacities to other countries that are also suffering from post-pandemic and their difficulty to really recover since then. Because of high indebtedness and things that you mentioned. So obviously, these initiatives, like for example, Brain Capital framework, really, and mainstreaming it at country level is important for long-term challenges. I think we need to face our long-term challenges, and of course, putting in place the funding to ensure this is happening. Thank you very much again for your intervention, and I would like to move straight away to Carlos Javier Regazzoni. He is the director of the Human Security and Global Health Committee of the Argentine Council of Foreign Relations, and he's also an international expert and consultant. He's a medical doctor, and he has a great experience in these aspects of brain and also socio-economic development. So Carlos, I would like to give you the floor. You have 8 minutes to introduce to us the concept, and we are looking forward to learn from you. Please, Carlos.
Oh, thank you very much. I thought to show you some slides, but then I have changed my mind. I would like to introduce you to bring all together to the main problem of modern political agenda, organization. How to organize the government. That is a main point. Any plural activity, any activity that involves more than one person, probably you should include a machine now, is an activity that entails a first instance of design, call it planning, strategic thinking, whatever you want. Then the organization itself, so the parts of the system playing together. And then you have an instance of decision-making that is, I prefer to split it from the idea of organization. And then you have performance. All the current sciences that entails with how to organize people following an aim, a goal, an objective, or whatever you prefer, economics, behavioral sciences, management sciences, any discipline taken to do with this, how to organize people, they finally have to deal with human behavior. And these disciplines create paradigms around which you organize the whole activity. Perhaps economics, they will tell you that rational behavior will be a paradigm, or whatever you want. What about the brain? And what about the amount of knowledge every year produced by neurosciences to introduce parameters in the way we organize society, we organize government? You don't make people work 10 hours a day, because that's bad for your health. Performance is related to rest. Well, what about all the knowledge, the knowledge we are producing, the scientific knowledge we are acquiring about how brain improves its performance, not only alone, but also playing together? Currently, organizational design goes no further than behavioral sciences and psychology. But neurosciences is most of the time absent from organizational design, mostly when you talk about the public policy organizations. So I think that the first concept is the challenge is how to bring the brain and neuroscience to the political arena in terms of organization. Then there is a second one, that is population level. You have talked about nutrition, infant nutrition, education. Well, those are, of course, I think, public community level parameters, most of them understood through neurosciences, but currently they are not designed through neurosciences. Latin America is losing its timing, you know, in terms of public, in terms of population parameters related to brain capital. Our level of education is going far behind average world level. Our infant nutrition is getting worse every day. The labor market is becoming more primary, and people is under the dealing with activities well below the capacities they could develop in other circumstances. And a proof of that is brain drain. Brain drain is a kind of decapitalization of countries. Africa has a huge experience on that, and Latin America is, at least Argentina, is increasing the crisis of brain drain, with half of the immigrants have a tertiary degree, when only 8% of our population holds a tertiary degree. So you see the chance to emigrate when you have a higher education degree is more or less 5 to 1. So population level parameters introduced through the concepts of neuroscience could help to develop a good nutrition, child nutrition policy. That is a problem in Argentina. To change completely the way we teach people, students. That is a problem in Argentina and probably in most of Latin American countries. But the main point is not population level. The main point is organization level. How to bring knowledge, neuroscience, neuroscientific knowledge, the way the brain behaves, how to bring that to the way you design policies, you design the state organization. And in that point, of course, systemic thinking is an aid, an evaluable aid, very important. But it's not all, not everything. Many times it is quite difficult to translate systemic thinking into organizational design. So I think that is an agenda for research, how to bring the human capital concepts, but mostly the way the brain behaves, to develop new, more innovative public organizations for Latin America. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. This is really central into the whole debate, because in reality, we always tend to use economic concepts and sociology into the policy design. They are more or less close, I would say. So they hear each other, and they are closer than most probably other disciplines like neuroscience, psychiatry, psychology. Obviously, all of this would go into what I call the curative part. So you see, health policy could solve certain issues, but then we can see clearly that I would rather talk about an endogenous design, and this is what you are proposing here, where neuroscience is really introduced at the first level of the policy thinking. And I think this is what we would like to achieve. And this is what you call the systemic thinking into the organizational design. I think this is not only a neuroscience discipline, but also other disciplines. I think we still lack this interaction between the disciplines into economic policy and policies in general, to ensure that we are really including all the parameters into our decision making, and then this decision making becomes I wouldn't say optimal because optimality is very relative, but then more optimal than it is today. You mentioned something that is really very important is, okay, we need to rethink our educational systems, our skills development. Just have a small question. How do you see this interacting with the digitalization wave that we are living nowadays? And also what the labor market is requiring, in terms of, for example, the future of work and what are the skills that we are needing. And you mentioned also brain drain, but is really brain drain nowadays a concept in a digital world? Please.
Yeah, well, I am very old-fashioned in that in this thing. So I think that people is in a country or is in another country, but people could collaborate from one country to another. But you have to create community, and to create community, you live in a country and you work for your country, mostly in the public sector. So brain drain is, of course, there is a global science agenda, but from my perspective, brain drain is a loss for a country. Of course, we are living in a globalized world. Going to the education, I am a little bit classical too there. I think that mostly people nowadays see education as a way of specializing, and the market mostly demand generalists. As machine evolves and robotics evolve and artificial intelligence evolve, you need more generalists rather than specialists. And our education is, at least in Argentina, is now in crisis, because the debate is what to teach people to understand the world. That is, and to understand the world equates to understand science too. I think that mathematics should be a core competence for every student, albeit most of them will never use mathematics in the future. And that is just an idea. Philosophy should be another science, and music too.
Thank you very much, Carlos.
You're
it's
welcome.
very clear. I would like to move straight away to Agustin Ibanez. Agustin, he is director of the Latin American Brain Health Institute. So you have the regional dimension at the Universidad Adolfo Ibanez, and he's a professor at the University San Andres, and also senior fellow with the Global Brain Health Institute, and among other things, visiting professor at the Trinity College of Dublin. Agustin, I give you the floor to give us the view of the Latin American in general, and then see what we can do further in the brain capital framework, please.
Great, thank you. Fantastic opportunity, Ryan. It's a great pleasure for me. So good to hear Fernando and Carlos, good friends for Argentina, and I had a great pleasure to work at the INECO for almost 10 years. So very nice to framing the discussion, not only from Latin America, but also some specific centers, right? So I will talk a little bit about something that Carlos also started to talk about challenges, but how to make how to transform challenges into opportunities from a Latin American perspective. I was a researcher, mainly focused in the lab in neuroscience, doing neuroscientific research, but I started to realize that big problems are outside the lab, happen in the people suffering brain health disease, in the families, in the fragile health systems, in the broken economies. All these kind of problems are not happening just in Argentina. They are happening across Latin America. And even with a huge richness and heterogeneity that you can find in Latin America, different cultures, different perspectives, we share several barriers and several challenges to brain health. And most important, to understand that brain health, it's going beyond medicalization, it's going beyond health, and it's moving towards economy as we are talking today, right? So my first step to trying to face this situation was trying to just create a common voice, just to understand that we're facing quite similar problems and we need similar solutions. So we first, in 2015, we created the Latin American and Caribbean Consortium on Dementia. Now we are more than 250 experts in the regions, including national prizes, different ministers of health of education across the region. And that we want to do is to share knowledge, to share solutions, to create opportunities to develop regional approaches. So with the LATCD, this Latin American Consortium, then we created a focused group on research. This is called the Multi-Partner Consortium to Expand Dementia Research in Latin America, or REDLAT. REDLAT now have a huge impact because what we want to do is to characterize brain health and dementia from underserved, underrepresented, non-stereotypic samples from Latin America. This is a very important idea. We tend to think in dementia in a truly global term, right? But it's not global at all. So the different risk factors are impacting the brain health in a non-uniform way across the global settings. How the economy links to the health and to family and to work also depends on socio-cultural backgrounds. How the brain impacts, how the brain is impacted by poverty, by social determinant of health, socioeconomic factors is not uniform. So we need to understand the diversity of brain health. So the REDLAT is aimed to focus in two big aspects of brain health. One is genetics, because Latin America is, involves a combination of European, African, and native admixtures, and many genetic presentation of dementia and brain health disease are unique to the region. We have the largest kindred of Alzheimer's disease, of ataxia, of CADASIL, also Parkinson's disease. So it's a huge opportunity there. But also, Latin America is the region with the largest inequality in the world. So social determinants of health and socioeconomic factors are important environmental drivers of the disease. So in REDLAT, we are combining genetics and social determinants of health, two important factors that are usually understood in a individual or split approach, but we want to understanding them together and to compare the profile of brain health and dementia in Latin America in comparison with US. So REDLAT now is supported by the NIH, by the National Institute of Aging, by the Global Brain Health Institute, by the Alzheimer's Association, the Rainwater Charitable Foundation, and many other stakeholders. We are providing several $1 million for the regions to create not only research, but also capacity building, to train professionals, to create international certified courses. And then we are starting also to work with families and patients, sorry. So an additional effort in this consortium was the creation of the Latin American Brain Health Institute, or BrainLab, in Chile. There was a very important founding to support the emerging leaders in the region and to support, the kind of local problems that Latin America needs to face, and helping to integrate them with the global agenda of dementia. So BrainLabs will involve almost 20 full professors, 100% devoted to research in brain health. We are going to launch the first PhD in brain health next year, and we will have a fellowship for emerging leaders that will be, certified by the Global Brain Health Institute. We have several postdocs. We have published 100 of papers. We have several national and international recognitions, and we are very happy about that. But we don't want to just focus in one single center. I think that the most important opportunity that we have in Latin America is thinking as a region without neglecting the huge difference that we have in the region, right? So the first step was the creation of an educational program called the European Latin American Brain Health Academy, or ELBA. And ELBA involves a set of different European and Latin American universities trying to, to put in the table the topic of brain health, and putting that, not only from a health perspective or a disease perspective, but also with focus in brain capital, in brain health diplomacy, and convergent science, and how to understand, I think that the post-pandemic has shown us how important are the interconnections between, work and mental health, brain health, economy. And we are living in a global world, but we don't know how to navigate in that global world. And an important aspect for that is to understand that, as Carlos mentioned, that the human factor is a critical aspect for adding value. What makes us humans, like empathy, social cooperation, or flexibility, or capacity to coordinate teams, or cooperative and social intelligence, are critical drivers for the future of the countries. And this is something that we started to provide with the ELBA, with this international initiative. This year, we launched the first 2 international courses on global brain health and Latin American brain health, with more than 20 faculties across all the globe, being supported by the Inter-American Developmental Bank and the Ministry of Health. And now we are working with those institutions to create the next year the most massive international course on brain health, that Harris will be also involved in. We are aiming to provide this course for 10,000 students next year. We are doing a huge effort to be sure that we can deliver this, and that will be a very, very important aspect. And then I think that we need to try to transfer that we have learned to other initiatives. So for instance, Chile have about 60 to 90% of patients with dementia not being diagnosed. We are going to use a single app called Neureka that has been developed here in Ireland, and we are now adapting, thanks to the government of Chile, to Chilean populations. This is an app that can track cognition through different games, can track different risk factors, can have, simultaneous and longitudinal assessment at no cost. And we are very enthusiastic about the opportunity to provide, support for early detection of dementia, and even for, preliminary diagnosis, even when those participants don't have any chance to get a formal diagnosis. We also, with LACD, have published in Alzheimer's and Dementia, the official journal of the Alzheimer's Association, an explicit regional plan for improving brain health, with strong recommendations from brain health diplomacy and brain capital insights, as well as we are now working also with caregivers and trying to develop not only, caregivers in the region are those with a higher burden, or among the higher burden in the world. And this is for many reasons, as we don't have almost formal care. We don't train caregivers. Most of the caregivers are relatives, and most of them are women, wife or daughters. We need to solve immediate problems, like providing therapeutic strategies for the caregivers, but we also need to provide long-term strategies. And I think that convergent science, brain health diplomacy, and brain capital are critical for this long-term strategy. So I think that Latin America is facing terrible challenges in our current times after the pandemics, but we also need to think about how to transform these challenges in new opportunities for improving the brain health of the populations.
Agustin, thank you very much. You mentioned many things that are essential for mainstreaming this concept into public policy, and also for cooperation, international cooperation. So of course you have achieved a lot in Latin America, in the Latin American context. And of course, we are here in another part of the world. We see that the same challenges. However, we might not see so many initiatives as what you explained. So there is a great opportunity for collaborations. And this is also why with Harris Ayer, we try, and others, we have been trying really to create this global alliance on brain capital to really push all the stakeholders who are interested in those same challenges and turn them into opportunities to really put their hands together and do together to move or to mainstream these concepts into public policy and try really to face those challenges or societal challenges that we have in front of us. But another point you mentioned is that brain health capital, of course, when you introduce the part of the skills based on the definition we have put forward, must become the pillar for post-pandemic recovery and resilience. And I think this is a great opportunity to listen to you from not only from Argentina, but also from Latin America, to see how that you have really responded with research, with fellowship, with education, and also with applications, apps for diagnosis. Because my second question to you is, how do you see the role of prevention? Of course, we have, especially in terms of dementia, you have the curative part, which everybody knows what it is. But then how do you see the role of prevention, for example, in terms of dementia and other mental health issues? Please.
Thank you so much for comments and questions. They are very relevant. Yeah, so regarding the first one, I think that we have a very simple problem. Our challenges are really larger than our tools. So we cannot solve the problem of dementia. We even yet cannot solve the mental health problem in the post-pandemic area. The governments cannot solve that. The private companies cannot solve that. The families, the patient alone cannot do it. So this is, for me, the most insightful part of brain capital. It's convergent science. It's understanding that we need to work coordinatedly, work together with the same horizon. This is, for me, essential. When I was working in Latin America, and I saw so many labs, trying to do research with a few resources, working in isolation, and just doing, 3 or 4 times more difficult all the work just because they are not being connected. So it's such an important thing to develop collaborations and connection with international stakeholders, and being really or truly global. Global in the sense that we should be global, as we need to understand the global horizon, but never forgetting the local aspect. So the global approaches that has been more successful in economics, I would say, than in health are of critical relevance for me. And the second question regarding prevention, I think that is huge. So first of all, regarding dementia, as you may know, in Latin America, the impact of modifiable risk factor is larger than the global average in the world. So the global average in the world is about 35 to 40% of the dementia presentation being explained by these modifiable risk factors. But in Latin America, we have 56% of dementia being explained for that factor. So it's huge. And as you can know, in high-income countries, the prevalence of dementia tend to be or reduced or stabilized. But in Latin America, we are expecting an increment by 100 to 200% by 2050. So prevention is a critical step. We are lucky to have the LATAM Fingers project that is aimed to provide multimodal prevention strategies from exercise, nutrition, sleep, activities, and we will see the impact in the forthcoming years. But I think that is critical. And as you mentioned, not only for dementia, we have a huge impact of cardiometabolic and cardiovascular disease in Latin America. And as we know, we are now developing a large study of more than 30,000 participants across Latin America. We will show that the social determinants of health are really, really having a strong impact on brain health, more than cardiometabolic factors. But at the same time, cardiometabolic factors are strongly associated with socioeconomic disparities. So prevention is the best strategy for the future in the region, in my opinion.
Thank you, Agustin. I think you really nailed down very important aspects in terms of prevention. And there also the role of nutrition, physical activities, reducers of stress, and probably more connection to nature. And all of those factors might be maybe small, but then the impacts of those must be very important if we can track it and understand a bit, over the years. We do more research to assess those factors and components on mental health issues and the evolution of the patterns of dementia that you mentioned. So, of course, if we want to reduce the dementia hazard, what you say, to 100% increase by 2050, we need to have a proactive approach to ensure that this is happening. And I think this is a great societal challenge. It can even be, we need to have those risks reduced, perhaps as much as possible, and we need to have the policy actions in place to allow us to reduce it. So thank you very much for this comment. Now I would like to move straight away to my colleagues, economists, and I have the pleasure to have William Heinz. William is the head of the new approaches to economic challenges, the OECD, and he has been the senior advisor for several years, and for this think tank within the OECD, the new approaches to economic challenges. We have many challenges, in fact, that he can talk about and share it with us, and this also allows us to think, I would say, outside the curve. And how to respond to those economic challenges with the new, perhaps, tools, new methods, policies, policy approaches, and so on. And also, William has been really promoting or co-promoting this neuroscience-based policy initiative since the start, together with Harris and others. And I'm very happy to have you with us, William. Please, the screen is yours.
Great, Rim. Well, thanks so much for having me here today. And I find myself listening to the other speakers and having, although they're from very different backgrounds than me, I find that I have a lot to agree with them on. And essentially what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes are how our economies and how people work, which is quite a broad theme. But if we look at the history of economic ideas in a Latin American context, over the last century, we will have seen these pendulum swings between markets, whether it's the Washington Consensus ideas of stabilize, liberalize, privatize, or more of a dependency theory approach where there's a greater role for the state. And we also have external dependence on finance, trade, migration, and that this can lead to stagnation in times of deglobalization and war, which these days we tend to have a bit of in the international arena. And so there's all sorts of questions about what sort of economics we need and what sort of economy we need, whether we're OECD economies or whether we're emerging economies in most of the rest of the world. And of course, Larry Summers has introduced a new category in the context of the UK, which is submerging economies. So there can be lots of policy mistakes as well. But very much along the lines of what Rim said earlier, I think we're trying to improve the way we understand the way the economy works by going beyond economics and bringing together these multidisciplinary approaches, whether that's neuroscience, medicine, social science, a whole array of different disciplines that we've heard about today. And it's about, as Carlos said, we have to engage all of these different cross-sector analytical capabilities because we're dealing with all these different policies, whether it's industrial strategy, trade policy, structural reforms. And we really need to think systematically about how we can emerge from the perma-crises that we face nowadays and how we can upgrade our understanding and approaches to better understand people, human-made systems in which they operate, and all of these challenges that are also emerging. And I think brain capital is a very interesting framework that really helps us to understand those things, because if we start with individuals, all of these individuals interact, and we have these systemic crises and dysfunctions, and these can spread and cascade from one system to another. For instance, our environment can be harmful to our brains through air pollution, nanoplastics, all sorts of toxins in food and water and products. So we really need to think about the interaction of individuals within these economic systems, but also natural and social systems, and what's going to emerge from that. The next point is we need to, as policymakers, I think we really need to delve more deeply into brain function, how the brain works, brain health, the sort of dysfunctions that can affect it. And to help us, Bob Shiller, who's a Nobel Prize winner in economics, he once described the economy as a remarkably complex structure, and fathoming it depends on understanding its laws, regulations, business practices and customs, and balance sheets. And they said, among other details. And of course, people and the brains they have are a pretty significant part of that story. But later on, Bob Shiller did sort of accept this, because in later work, he said that the brain, the computer, and the economy, they're all three devices whose purpose is to solve fundamental information problems in coordinating the activities of individual units, the neurons, the transistors, or individual people. And as we improve our understanding of the problems that any one of these devices solves and how it overcomes obstacles in doing so, we learn something valuable about all three. So we really need to bring together people who understand the digital transformation, people who understand the brain, and people who understand the economy, because we're dealing with these complex interacting systems. And so that brings us to the idea of brain capital. We need to think about the brain, not only because we essentially have a brain economy, a knowledge economy, where ideas, creativity, innovation are the driving forces now, but also the impacts of adverse brain function have never been greater. And so the multi-trillion-dollar costs of mental disorders and dementia, which have been talked about, and indeed COVID worsened that, COVID-induced stress and isolation. It's been called a mental health catastrophe in various quarters. The damaging effects of COVID itself on neurons and long COVID, the full extent of which we haven't really realized. There's the mass psychological distress of fake news and populist tribalism. There's science denialism. There's the increasing rates of and underemployment due to automation and a structural transformation in our economies. And during the COVID crisis, McKinsey found that 90% of employees have noted declines in mental behavioral health during the pandemic. And that, of course, is associated also with declining productivity. So these are not minor issues of brain health. These actually have quite significant impacts on the economy and how it works. So at the OECD, we've sort of realized this, and we set up the Neuroscience-inspired policy initiative a couple of years ago with Harris and with RIM and all those helping us. And we've developed the concept of brain capital, which of course brings together these issues of brain skills, brain health, as an indispensable part of the economy. And I think it's a radically different way of thinking about these problems, very much a bottom-up way, not just thinking about these large macro systems, but actually starting with an individual and thinking about how they interact. And that's a necessary way of thinking about productivity, gender equality, mental health, education, and others. And so we're really trying to bring these things together. And let me give 3 examples where I think understanding of neuroscience and brain capital is really starting to influence policy discussion. The first is productivity. And the standard story in economics is that to enhance productivity, we just need to reallocate our resources more efficiently in our economy. So if we make it easier for people to move, to pick up new skills, then they can just find new jobs. But what neuroscience tells us is that actually picking up new skills is not that easy, especially as workers age. And so we're not quite as flexible as maybe we'd like our markets to be. And also, people operate within a social environment. So it's often difficult to move them from that social environment. So we can't just be moved from one area to another. And there's also creativity, innovation, and collective learning. Increasingly, these types of brain skills are really at the heart of productivity. And again, in the economics of this, it's rather a black box, where if we get the structural policy settings right, we'll be able to promote these things. But we need to understand more about the neural process and how we can promote it and how policies can affect it. There's also, just as a minor example of productivity, teleworking. Issues like Zoom fatigue are a real thing. We're a social species. We look for behavioral cues from the way we communicate, and a lot of communication is nonverbal. So it can be quite wearing to be teleworking all the time. So these are real phenomena, and they have effects on productivity. Related to that is my second point, which is early childhood development and aging. And the first 5 years are really critical. We're working increasingly on this. It's become more or less a mainstream economic topic now to focus on early childhood. But 100 million neural connections per second are formed in young children. 90% of brain growth happens in the first 5 years. So we have to be very careful about the undermining cognitive development during these years, but there are also a lot of opportunities about how we can use the childcare system. Parental leave is an important aspect of this. Universal access to maternal and child health. All of these things might actually, in the longer term, help boost productivity, improve well-being, but those first 5 years are really crucial. And it's the same with aging that others have talked about, including Augustine, the dementia, and how we care for people in later years and the consequence of neurodegeneration so that they could still have high levels of well-being and productivity in society. And the third point is perhaps not a standard one you'd hear about in thinking about neuroscience, but that's inflation and cost of living crises. And so what does this have to do with the brain? Well, increasingly, we're trying to develop innovative approaches using insights and methods from behavioral neuroscience, contagion dynamics, network science, econometrics, physics, and mathematics. And if you think about inflation, the standard story of expectations about where the price level is going to go, that might explain why inflation might go from 2 to 4%, but it doesn't really explain why it goes from 2 to 10%. So we could think of expectations as a type of contagion. We get these nonlinear dynamics, much like a financial crisis. So again, understanding people, why they're loss averse, why the undermining of value has psychological impacts, why the cost of living crisis is such a political problem, which again, Carlos said, we need to bring these things into the political realm. But it becomes more tractable and understandable if you start to look at the insights from these things. So these problems are not purely economic problems. These are human problems. And so we really need to understand humans. And my conclusion is that, the world and Latin America and all different regions with their cultures, their institutions, they're not as simple as we model them. And they're not as simple as we consider them. So we need to start to look at people and economies as they really are. Thanks.
Thank you very much, William. You really concluded with a very clear statement that we need to better understand the human problems, not to theorize them as we normally do in economics and try to find or plug them in a straitjacket that is not working on all the societies, the cultures, and all of that. So we need to understand a bit more the specificities at the individual level and try to move on with a bottom-up approach and better integrate different disciplines that are much more equipped to understand the human behavior and the human human specificities rather than economics. Of course, economics could take these knowledge that we are accumulating in different disciplines and try to put it in a coherent way, when understanding, as you mentioned, the interaction between the different concepts in a optimal route. Again, I don't want to use optimality, but no, I don't want to use optimality, wrong. in a logical way, I would say, as much and based on the environment we are living in and the challenges we are living in. And you mentioned very clearly, we are in an environment of war, for example, in Europe and in other parts of the world. Obviously, inflation, you have the post-pandemic, which is creating even further challenges to our economies and societies. But then we need to move forward and trying really to integrate and embed all those knowledge that we are accumulating at a global level, not only at a country level or a region level, at a global level, and try to have this, in my view, as a universal type of knowledge that is not only restricted to one country, but it's on the globe. I think we need to benefit from it at a global level. And I think the role of the OECD and your initiative of the new approaches to economic challenges is really extremely well equipped to help all these countries, not only the OECD countries, but also other countries that are not OECD members, to really face and respond to those challenges going forward. And those challenges are only increasing; they are not decreasing at all. And brain capital could be one of those answers that we need to implement going forward. So thank you very much, William, for these insights. I think we have been working for a couple of years now on this, trying really to understand how all of this will make sense. And I am extremely happy to hear nowadays that Argentina and other countries in Latin America, they're really advanced in all those debates in brain capital. And I guess we will continue this under the Brain Capital Alliance to promote research, free access research. And as I mentioned at the beginning of my introduction also, we are developing this dashboard to measure the brain capital. Of course, we are economists, we tend to measure, but then something is not measurable, it's very difficult to apply policies to it. So we need to define, measure, and then define the policies and try to implement them. And with this, I would like to introduce my dear colleague, Andrew Nevin. Andrew, he is the co-leader of, co-coordinator of the Brain Capital Working Group on measuring brain capital. We've been trying to steer the group, multidisciplinary group, for a couple of years now to try to really come up with the definition. And at the end, we managed to do a definition, and we managed to get some indicators, key indicators to allow us to follow the pattern of brain capital. Andrew, he's a partner, financial services leader and chief economist at the PricewaterhouseCoopers. He's based in Nigeria, in Africa. And he is not only a thinker, but also a doer. So please, Andrew, floor is yours.
Thank you, Rim, for that kind introduction. And it's in an event like this. Oh my goodness, we're flipped around. Let's see if we can get that. How does that? Does that look better? Okay. Thank you. All right. So I'll move over. It's just wonderful to be here, and it's always great to go last at this kind of event because you get to listen to such brilliant people. I really want to commend Fernando, Carlos, and Augustine. When I hear what's going on in Argentina and Latin America in general in this area, you're really the global leaders. And in my adult life, I spent 10 years living in Europe, 10 years living in Asia, 10 years living in North America, 10 years living in Africa now, and I really want my Latin American decade, and I think brain capital may be the reason to come and do it. So just fantastic. And again, it's always great to see my dear friend William. We shared a number of meals during the COVID lockdown, just after the various lockdowns, before the next lockdown then, and really happy to hear what he's talking about. So of course, so much has been said, so there's only a few things that I can add here. And let me start out by saying, despite all of the challenges that we understand in the world, so the war in the Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, climate change, the mental toll, the impact of COVID and the continuing economic impact of that, the role of technology, big tech in our world, many, many challenges. But I remain optimistic. And the major reason I remain optimistic is because I really think that brain capital as a concept is something that's going to be transformative on that. And now we have a long way to go. I can let you know today I went to have a medical checkup. I have a very good doctor, really takes good care of me as I age, getting close to retirement. And we spent 97% of the time on things below the neck. and less than 30%, less than 5% of the time on things above the neck. So we have a long way to go. But why is the brain capital concept so powerful? Let me give you a few reasons. One reason, I think, is we all have a brain. And we all understand very intuitively when we talk about brain capital that all of the things that we do in our life and all of the success or failures we have are mediated by the brain. So when you introduce the concept of brain capital, it has something that's intuitively understood, whether it's a policymaker, someone in an organization, someone at the individual level on that. The second reason I'm optimistic is, of course, I've learned so much in the last few years working with Rim, Harris, William, and others, Ian in Dublin, that we know so much more about neuroscience that we didn't know 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So everyone's actions are mediated by the brain, and we now know a lot more about it. So that gives me reason for optimism. But the third reason is something that I think the economists will show over time. And of course, it's very critical that the neuroscientists and the economists work together, as we've been trying to do on the brain capital effort. But we have a strong hypothesis at an individual level. If you invest in brain capital, so whether it's brain skills, brain health, the dimensions we're trying to do, whatever dimension brain capital, your individual performance, your individual life will be better. At an organizational level, if you invest in brain health, brain skills, in improving the capacity of the brain, improving the brain capital, the organization will perform better. At a societal level or national level, again, if you invest in brain health, brain skills, brain capital, society will be better. And I think it's an unusual confluence when you get something that has that kind of synergistic power, where at every level, the individual has, because in some things, the individual may have an incentive to invest, but the corporation organization doesn't, or the public policy people don't care. But here we have something where the three levels working together all have the same objective. I mean, not only will investing in brain capital as an individual make my life better, it'll also make my company's performance better. It'll also make the economics of the entire country better on that. And I think that is an unusual confluence of synergies that this group really needs to capitalize on. And I'm finding the more we talk about brain capital with whatever audience, there's that receptive to us. So how do we actually make the progress? Well, Rim and I, as Rim said, we've been chairing the brain capital subcommittee on the brain capital index under the OECD. And that's really critical because it then gets the different dimensions that really impact brain performance, brain capital, into granular parts that we can then measure, and we can focus on how to improve the granular parts on that. And once we've got those sorts of measurements, I think you'll find that at all three levels, there's very, very quick progress on that. And that gives me real reason for optimism. As I've always thought in being involved in brain capital, given all the challenges that we have, whether it's disinformation campaign, the lack of critical thinking, the climate change issue, lowering productivity around the world, depression among young people, they're all linked by brain capital. That's why I've chosen to use my time to be able to focus on the brain capital issue on that. So I'd like to leave you with that final optimism there, that this group and the people working on the brain capital issue are really working on what is, at the end of the day, the solution to many of our disparate challenges that we look around the world. And the synergy between the different levels of investing in brain capital is going to pay real dividends to the world. And the final thing I'll leave you with is, this group has really worked very hard to bring together different disciplines: mental health experts, neuroscientists, economists, psychologists, sociologists, and others. And it's critical that we continue to do that, because unless we bring together this multidimensional, multidisciplinary way of acting, we're not going to bring the whole brain capital system to the where it can be for the world. So let me again say thank you to all my fantastic panelists, Rim and William, Fernando, Carlos, and Augustin. Incredible to listen to you today. And I really look forward to seeing more progress in Latin America and Argentina on the brain capital issue, and Argentina to really be the brain capital nation, and progress around the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And with this, I would like to move into our questions and answers from the audience. I don't know if I see any questions and answers. Could we move into the panel view, please, with all the speakers? Yes, and please switch on your cameras, Agustin. So we talked about
Sorry, yes.
what you guys have achieved in Argentina, in Latin America. Of course, the importance of the brain capital framework and neuroscience-based policy initiative of the OECD to solve societal, socioeconomic challenges. And Andrew has confirmed all of this, also from an implementation perspective on how we really move from this. I have two main, I wouldn't say straight questions, but just to comment on. We have started with Fernando to talk about the funding. Of course, Argentina is facing difficulties, budgetary difficulties, but not only Argentina. This is the world is over-indebted nowadays. Of course, some countries, they have much more capacities to deal with it as compared to other countries. If I look at Africa and Mediterranean South countries, majority of them are even facing distress and defaults based on the situation of that they have. So are they really equipped to, I would say, to respond to long-term societal challenges? And then the modern economy is becoming ever more challenging in terms of the uncertainty, increasing uncertainty because of climatic change challenges, digital transformations, the frequency of the pandemic, and we thought always that the pandemics have been won, but in reality with COVID, we saw that 2 years and a half were needed to solve the problems, and up to now it's not 100% solved. So augmented uncertainty is stressful for our brains, and how do we deal with it? While the financial capacities of countries is reducing. So how would they really be able to solve the challenges with no resources? And I want you to comment on this. I start with Carlos. Yeah, you're muted.
I'm sorry. If you look at the three of us from Latin America, Fernando, Agustin, and me, where we represent less than 5% of Latin American youngs. Even to wear a tie is an exception in Latin America nowadays. Not to mention to lunch, to have a breakfast in the morning, or to have a computer, or to know how to resolve a very simple mathematical equation. That is an exception. So the divide between you and us, I mentioned you, developed nations, is incredible, astonishing. And I would like to take the occasion to mention one special problem: addictions. Addictions are very, very prevalent among young Western countries, not among young South Asian nations. It's very, very prosecuted in Korea, in Japan, not to mention in China, where it is completely forbidden. And in Latin America, addictions are becoming a real crisis for the youth. So we are now the most unequal region in the earth. We are now one of the, not the poorest, but we are the region that grows less on earth. And we are the most unsafe and insecure region on earth. Now it's more dangerous to live in Mexico City or in Rosario City than to live in Afghanistan or even in Ukraine, in probabilistic terms. So the problem for Latin America is so huge that we assist to a failure of the state. When you read all the statistics about how people see democracy, in Latin America, people prefer another regime than democracy, if that regime is going to solve the problems we entail. So, well, the panorama, I think, is grim, and the challenge for brain capital concepts is not only to be a framework to analyze reality, but also to create parameters to change reality. And that is the most difficult thing to do.
Thank you very much, Carlos. It's very clear. Fernando?
Thanks, Rim. I think that the funding problem is a dimension of importance, because we can do any public policy without funding and without resources. But working more closer to the governments in last years, we could see that there is another problem. Sometimes there are resources, as I mentioned, multilateral fundings, but politics sometimes do not know how to use that funding, because they don't have the ideas of these new approaches to politics. I think that many brain capital innovations are not as expensive as other kind of innovations in public policy. If you have to do a big gas tube or something, it is much more costly than a public policy, a brain capital innovation. So it's a problem of funding, but it's also a problem of how to use funding. If politics have no idea about the importance of brain capital, the idea that brain capital is on, and all this stuff about neuroscience, behavioral science, brain health is not a thing about social sciences or things of scientifics, or even a medical, or only a focal medical issue. If they don't understand that has projections, as we have listened all the day today, has implications in the development, in the capital growth, in economic development, if they don't understand that investment is very low in terms of the long-term impact, and there is no development without scholarship, without learning, without investment in brain health, the problem is not the funding, but the use of the funding. And my experience in the last years is that most politics are very, very far from these kind of ideas. And I think that us as scientists and neuroscientists will have some responsibility, because I think that neuroscience has been not used enough in politics, in public policy. For example, in comparison with behavioral sciences, all the behavioral economics movement had much more reach in the governments. Now we have a nudge unit in Argentina, and we have nudge units in more than 200 of governments in the world, but we don't have neuroscience units. I'm not interested in that, having a neuroscience unit. I'm interested in that neuroscience concepts as brain capital, brain health, enter in the government office. And I think that we have not reached that point. Neuroscience is outside government offices. Behavioral science not. Why not? Why we are out office governments and behavioral science not? Because they had the virtue, they had the insight of how to do it. They showed that using behavioral science, you can cut costs, and they showed with RCTs. So I think that neuroscience had to learn from behavioral science how to enter in government offices. Once you enter that, you can get some funding if you are intelligent enough. Maybe not all this funding that we would like to invest in brain capital, and maybe with the time we will grow in that. But the first thing we have to do, first than funding, is to enter in government offices. Outside government offices, we will not have any funding. We will not get implementation of neuroscience ideas. We have to enter public offices and then challenge the current public policies and the funding disputes.
Yeah, I think you mentioned this use of funding, and you make me think of the purpose type of like financial instruments that could be even funded by the market. I mean, it's not only a matter of having funding from the governments, because as we discussed previously, the governments, they're facing short-term budgetary challenges, and they are even themselves, facing restructuring plans and moving into what I call a difficult funding period. So perhaps we need to think a bit outside the box and try to introduce all those new global concepts to the market participants, because liquidity exists in the global market. Now, if we have much more transparency on the use of funding, then you might give the opportunity to other players in the market, bondholders or equity holders, whatever it is, to see that their funding is used to respond to the global challenges, including what we are talking about. So I think we need to think again beyond I wouldn't like to call them old paradigm, but then probably evolutionary paradigms. Even they could include the governments to a certain extent via certain guarantees or semi-guarantees to respond altogether in a private-public type of fashion, also including the academia and the knowledge, because this is also important to know as much, to solve societal challenges. And of course, use of funding is very important, and this use of funding has to be transparent and open to the public. So then there is public accountability in that sense. And the role of technology could be also essential into that sense. For example, having everything there to the public know where the money is going.
Yes, I think that you mentioned an issue that is very important in Argentina, and I think it's extensive to all Latin America. The participation of private capital in research funding is very, very short in comparison with other regions. It's other of our shortcomings in the region is that most research is funded by states, and private capitals don't share the utilities in investment in research. And I think that this is a cultural change, that brain capital needs to be a cultural change in the region, not only the governments. It's true what you mentioned. It's not only that officers in the government need to incorporate these ideas and change their mind, but maybe also the private sector need to incorporate the idea of brain capital and the investment in brain capital. Some companies in Argentina and the region of the knowledge industry, software producers, and that do that, but inside their companies, not outside their companies. They don't fund national programs or collaborate outside their walls. In Argentina, there is a big and growing area of industries of knowledge, but they are sometimes encapsulated in themselves. They grow, and they grow in terms of brain capital of the company, but not brain capital of the country or the region. Maybe it's a cultural change that we need to achieve, not only with government, but also with the private sector, to invest in the brain capital of the country, not only in the brain capital of their companies.
Absolutely, and this is why a global approach is needed at the country level to allow us to move into this cultural change, I would call it, or mentality change, from very small initiative to upscale them at a national and at the regional, at a global level. This is what we have been trying to do also with the dashboard and with the effort that we've been developing over the couple of years. Agustin, what do you think about this?
Well, I will be brief. I parallel many things that have been said, but I think that we need to consider a fourfold approach. We need to think in the public, in the stakeholders or policymakers, in research and academia, but also in companies. But most important, we need to coordinate those efforts. As the pandemics, when inequalities in Latin America, as Carlos has been clearly illustrated, no single isolated approach will be enough. This is critical. So we need first the public. We need to bring influencers, artists, and people with high visibility to disseminate the relevance of brain health and brain capital. This is the first one, because if we don't change, the common sense, and we don't bring this to the popular culture, it will be really harder to make changes. Then policymakers, of course, especially in Latin America, they have critical issues like childhood or isolated problems. I think that we need to connect more health system with development system, with educational system. This is something that policymakers need to work on it if they want to truly develop an agenda for brain capital. Then regarding research and academia, I think that we need to move from neuroscience. To be honest, I am a neuroscientist, but I think that transdisciplinary is the most important thing in that discussion, that we know our brain health is, outside the brain. It's education, it's good sleep, it's a better social determinant of health. So we need to understand neuroscience, but not in isolation. We need to understand the transdisciplinary efforts to promote brain health. And at the same time, we need to focus in research, and a kind of research that could have translational implication. I think that the global stakeholders today are focusing in more global approaches. And in Latin America, you can get funded from NIH, from many other global stakeholders, and the research teams in the region are not well aware about that situation. And finally, the companies, I think that in Latin America, the most innovative companies are investing in knowledge, are not investing in brain capital yet. So we need to, provide a more clear message of why brain capital is a better investment than pure technology or knowledge. And I think that the coordination of these fourfold areas should be, centralized. I mean, maybe the OECD or other groups, but we need to coordinate those efforts. If we just expect that this will, top down emerge from nothing, it never will happen.
Thank you, Agustin. This is all very important, and we will keep it in our report and share it with all of you. This is extremely insightful recommendations, in fact, to move into our project of the Brain Capital Alliance. And I turn to Harris, who is in the audience, to really move into that direction as well. So I turn to William. So what is your view about this discussion? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Maybe by way of conclusion, I'll take up 2 points that Fernando mentioned, which I think are really important. The first is money. And I think that a lot of the issues that we're talking about, the concern is that very jaded policymakers might think, oh, here's another fad that we have to throw money at, public money at. And I think it's very important, as many of the speakers have said, that we're not talking here about an agenda which is about increasing social spending, but it's actually about investments in the future. So early childhood development, for example, is not just a cost. It's actually laying the right framework for the cognitive development of people. And that's not an insignificant thing. So we really need to be careful when we think about money. These are really important and critical investments for the future. And the second point is, I couldn't help myself, Fernando. I had to take up the issue of nudge units. because I think that in policy, again, there's often a tendency to take up an idea from academia, and once it's been taken up, it can be very difficult to displace it, even if the academic debate moves on. And so nudging, I think nudging is perfectly fine for dealing with certain types of problems, very discrete types of issues. But in a sense, what we're saying with nudging is that people are more or less rational, but they have these cognitive constraints. And all we need to do is nudge them into doing the right thing, essentially. But that's a bit like saying that if people don't fit the model, then we should change the people. Wow, this isn't very good from a neuroscience point of view. And so I think we need to go much deeper. And there's a whole range of insights. As Augustine said, we do really need these transdisciplinary units around government that can advise on the fundamentals, and not just about improving incrementally issues here and there, but the whole system functioning better. Thanks.
Thank you, William. Andrew, do you have anything to add to this discussion?
Yeah, no, I mean, I spend my days talking to policymakers and talking to CEOs of companies. So let me tell you what I think a CEO would say. Well, I know what a CEO would say, or what I would say as a leader in my company. If you came to talk to me about brain capital, I said, absolutely, I get it. I have a brain performs better. We're going to do better. I'm willing to get behind it. The next thing he's going to ask, or she is going to ask, is, all right, if we're going to invest in brain capital, what do we do? So there needs to be programs that reflect the neuroscience. So we need to translate the neuroscience into programs that can be used, in this case, at an organizational level. And the next question the CEO is going to ask, she is going to ask, is, what do you think the payoff is? I know it's a bit uncertain, but what do you think? Is it 5 to 1? Is it 10 to 1? Is it 51? Is it 100 to 1? And this is really an area that I think there's a new term emerging. Well, let's call it brainomics, which is the economics of the brain. And I think for this brain capital movement to really be powerful, it needs to combine the neuroscience with the economics, as William has said on this, to make that case. But I think if you go to a CEO at an organization and you say, for this kind of intervention, and of course, one of the things I believe, not as a neuroscientist, but what you've all taught me over the last few years, is when you start to intervene with these programs, the impact is relatively quick. So it's not necessarily a payoff for this sort of intervention 5 or 10 years down the road, but it's now. So I'm going to be prepared to make that investment and at least give it a try. And I think that story has to be constructed for the CEOs. I think for the public policymakers, it's a little bit similar, a little more challenging, however, because of course, these are more long-term things. So again, we need the brainomics. If we invest in the brain capital in the 0 to 5 age group, what do we think the economic, I mean, there's a human payoff, which is fantastic, but unfortunately in our world, we also need the economic payoff. So can we get the economic, can we design what is the intervention program? Because of course, if we haven't translated the neuroscience into specific intervention program, policymakers and company CEOs are going to say, how is this relevant? But assuming that we're able to, based on neuroscience, design these types of interventions, we then need to create the brainomics about it. And then I think we can have the conversation with policymakers along the lines that all of the discussants have said, which is, you know, this is not expensive in the relative scheme of things versus you think, what's expensive is dementia. So let's put some mathematics on. Through this intervention, we can increase someone's productive working life by 2 years. What's the payoff of that versus the cost of the intervention? So putting in that kind of language for both the corporate or organizational leaders, but also the public policy leaders, I think is really critical. But it underscores what we've all said this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are, which is we need the economics, the neuroscience, the mental health experts, the psychologists, sociologists to come together to create this framework, both that translates the neuroscience into the programs, but then also translate it into the human impact and also the traditional economic impact.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think you summarized it. You summarized the discussion very well. I would like to thank all of you because I see the time. Fernando, yes, Fernando.
Yes, I would like to make a clarification about my idea of nudge units. I'm sure, I'm absolutely convinced that nudge units are limited, and that's why I think that neuroscience and other science, data science, and all kind of stuff that make improve and go beyond nudge units. But my idea is that we have to learn from the nudge units how to enter governments, because If not, we will have very nice frameworks, multi-level, multidisciplinary frameworks outside the governments. If politics don't have those frameworks inside the units, our best frameworks will fail, because they will be for our groups, for our events, for the discussions of the academy. What the Natch unit for me is a nice model is how to enter inside the government. They have, for me, is the best thing they most than the Natch itself is the way they enter. Maybe Natch is one tool between others, and it's useful for one thing and not useful for other things. The evidence base is fluctuating as all the tools, but I think the best thing they could reach is to enter the offices. They influenced real politics, and until our ideas from brain capital or frameworks, interdisciplinary frameworks, do not reach that point of being inside the government unit, we will have a very limited reach. I think that this is the leadership from Natch units more than the Natch itself, how to enter the offices.
That's very clear, Fernando, and I would like now to thank all the panelists for very, very exciting and very impressive discussion about brain capital innovations in Latin America and how we can leverage your experiences in other regions of the world. Very happy to have you all here, Fernando, Carlos, Agustin, William, Andrew. We will continue working all together under the Brain Capital Alliance. And then we continue giving the recommendations and also doing research all together, because I guess the collaborative approach that Agustin was mentioning is the approach to ensure that this is all accessible to other countries of the world. Maybe, Andrew, next meeting we will have it focused on Africa, see what we can do over there. For sure, the challenges are, when I hear, Carlos, the challenges that you mentioned are all the same in our regions. So the challenges are global, and we just need to provide solutions that are adaptable to each country's situation, its specificity. So thank you very much for your time today at our webinar. I would like to thank the speakers again, the audience who have been with us. This webinar was streamed on Facebook, so it's open to everybody. And then I thank everybody for their time, and I hope to see you again in next webinars. So our next webinar would be back to the COP27 in November, so on climatic challenges and issues. So we keep in touch, and thank you very much also for the organization of EMEA for all the logistics of this webinar. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Ren.
Bye.
Thank you.